been saying this for decades. If I had access to just a ton of money, I would create age-appropriate critical thinking courses from kindergarten on, maybe even preschool on. And if a school wouldn't carry it, you could do private lessons that parents could maybe sign their kids up for, or teach it in summer camps, or do whatever you can to let people access that from day one. I think if you look at QAnon, if you look at a third of people who identify as Republican think that Trump is going to retake the office this year, my God. And I think that that is a reflection of the fact that we don't prioritize from the very beginnings of education teaching people how to think. Not what to think, how to think. How do you take information? How do you find the coloring in that information? How do you check out the source of that information?
Veteran radio interviewer Angie Coiro joins John and Scoop on this episode of the Plutopia podcast. We discuss Angie's career in broadcasting and the current state of media and politics.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Plutopia News Network's podcast. This is our latest episode, and our guest today is Angie Coiro. Angie's an award-winning radio journalist and on-stage interviewer. She's done radio and TV work in the San Francisco Bay Area for over the last 25 years, and she just ended her syndicated radio show, In Deep, with Angie Coiro. So Angie, how'd you get started as a radio journalist?
Funny story there, John. No, seriously, it was a funny story. Sixth grade, and we had to take, back in the day, girls had to take home ec, and I could not sew for the life of me. I was supposed to make, this does tell you, and I promise, we were supposed to make beach bags, and the beach bag was a tube with a circle on the bottom and a string on the top that closed. And just to give you an idea of how inept I was, you cut out the pieces, then the instructions were to sew the pieces together. At no point did they say to take the pattern off the cloth. So I sewed together the cloth and the paper, and they said, no, you were supposed. I said, well, nobody told me to take that off. So then I kind of got that finished. Then the rest of the class moved to blouses. And I never did finish the blouse. There was supposed to be a fashion show at the end of the semester where everyone showed off their beach bags and their blouses. And I had neither one, really. So they made me the narrator of the fashion show. And Mr. Eshelman, the principal, said, you have a lovely voice. Why don't you do the announcements in the morning? So I did the announcements in the morning. And I've kind of been talking ever since. And eventually I started getting paid for it. That's really it. It's because I didn't have a blouse.
So did you formally study journalism, or did you just kind of wander into it?
I wandered into it. I did take classes relevant to journalism. I took a class in media law. I took classes in production. I took classes in news comprehension and news analysis. But I was going to be an actor. Hands down, for some reason, I was fixated on having my Tony by the age of 31. I don't know where that came from. I was going to be 31 when I got my Tony. And I did not. I am still without a Tony. So moved to Hawaii. There was no paid acting work there. Got into radio instead and moved from doing traffic and weather and the occasional news into really hosting. And then by the time I got into San Francisco, I moved into hosting one of the most prominent shows in the city and really hit my stride. I really hit my stride there. And I started to take interviewing really seriously. At first I mistook it for more a matter of entertainment than it was. And I still spell in on AM radio where I think it really is still more entertainment than enlightenment. But I started to really grasp it as a journalistic form.
Yeah, I've always loved reading interviews, and that makes you want to conduct interviews. It could make you want to be interviewed. But I was kind of both. I thought, oh, that would be interesting if somebody just asked me a bunch of questions. But then I thought, even more interesting to ask somebody else a bunch of questions, which is kind of what we do here every week, constantly, over and over
I love
again.
interviewing people. I absolutely love it. And I love interviewing people who really want to be there. And you'd think by virtue of, nobody's ever shackled to show up for an interview, but people invest at different levels in being a guest. And sometimes you just get those people who they're so there with you. And they're less focused on how do I sound, which is a death knell for good radio. And they're more focused on being into the conversation. And you get the feeling that if you turn off the microphones and you send away any audience, you can still have this amazing conversation. I love that.
They can also be thinking a lot about like promoting their thing, like their book or whatever. And, when you're interviewing people, you don't necessarily want to hear about their project. I mean, I understand that people want to plug their project,
of course,
but on the other hand, you just kind of want to get to know the person, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of draw them out.
And the ideas. When you write a book, obviously, you've fleshed out your topic already, but all of the ideas about a topic aren't in the book. That would be impossible. So if you're willing to go beyond what's in the pages of your book, and you don't interrupt every third paragraph with, this is why I put in my book, which is named blah, blah, blah. I just want to strangle those people. And you really want to talk about the ideas. Say ideas go so far beyond the pages of the book.
Well, I lived and worked in the Bay Area for about 40 years, and I noticed, having worked in radio, I listened to a lot of radio, and the difference between KQED and the other so-called news-oriented stations was everyone else seemed to be looking for the soundbite, the 30 seconds or 60 seconds that they could flash up as their news and then move on. And things I heard on KQED were actual interviews, finding out about, how this person, who this person is, what makes them tick, how they do what they do. And I found that was really important, but you heard so little of that kind of interviewing on a lot of the commercial radio stations.
Yeah, there are occasional bright lights on radio. There's a woman who is on KGO in the afternoons, Pat Thurston, and she's there for the journalism. She's there to find out what's going on and convey it to her audience. And she doesn't do any of the sound effects, and she doesn't do any of the artificial yelling. She'll yell. She is organically yelling. She has a POV. But she's really there to use the organ of radio to get information out. It's less about personality interviewing. It's less about book interviewing. It's almost always current events, and it's almost always local current events. But it is an art form that can transfer from here to there. The station that I'm at now is KALW San Francisco. And when I say I'm at it, my syndicated show has been syndicated from KALW for the last year. And they're magical. They are scrappy. They are diligent. They are married to putting out. It's kind of like KQED with even more dimension. There's less concern about meeting an NPR sound, an NPR style, and it's entirely about the content. It's so about the content. And a lot of the people coming up through KALW, they have an audio academy where they bring students in and they train them. And these are students who come in, with really good chops to begin with. They've got the intuition, they've got some experience. And by the time they're coming out, they have integrated the knowledge of like the radio elders. They've taken in the wisdom and the tradition of longtime radio, but they've got the strength and the versatility of also having come up through the age of podcasts and the age of not working so hard to sound like you're on NPR. They are who they are, and they're doing brilliant new journal. I love KALW. It was the first station I worked at when I moved to San Francisco. And it's ironic that I'm back there after like 30 years. And it just, wow, it's an amazing place to be. It's my favorite station I've ever worked at.
Well, I'd forgotten about KLW. And, there are a number of listener-sponsored stations around like Pacifica's, KPFA. I worked there for a while, and it seemed like in the Bay Area, radio really mattered to a lot of people. You can't find that kind of thing out in the central part of the country. It's mostly AM radio. That's Rush Limbaugh and all of that crowd. But there seemed to be a more progressive bent in even the commercial stations in the Bay Area.
Yeah, there really is, and I know that a lot of people feel underrepresented in the Bay Area because we run blue. We are a blue area, and that said, the Rush Limbaugh style station does exist in the Bay Area, does quite well. And it might be because there's so little for that particular crowd to turn to. They've got a captive audience. You know what's funny is I'm looking at your microphones, which are very classy, and I have this fantastic, for podcasting and recording, I have this fantastic blue. That's the brand. That's not the cover. It is the color. And I forgot to plug it in. So what you guys are getting is this really terrible built-in microphone sound on my Mac. And I could sound a lot better if I did this, but oh well. I just wanted you to know I'm not a complete inept, non-professional radio person.
Do you want to plug it in? You can plug it in if you want to.
Could I? Okay.
Sure.
We're gonna have a variety in sound. Now, here's an odd thing: is that sometimes when I plug it in, it opens up iTunes and I lose my audio. So let's see what happens. Here we go.
Well, we can always edit.
Actually, you sound a lot better than a lot of people that we get on Zoom.
Really? It's just an old Mac.
You're projecting. A lot of people will mumble and they're start talking like this.
Yeah. Oh, that's my acting chops. That's it. How's that?
You're professional. Yeah, it's coming through great.
Is that working?
Yeah.
And now I can't hear you all the time. Never mind. I just figured out I can't hear you, and it's weird.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it opened Mac Music. Someday I'll figure this out. You may have understood at this point that my tech chops are not what my reporting chops are.
Our Zoom dependence has created some challenges for us because occasionally we'll interview somebody who doesn't really have good connectivity. Like your connection's really good. You're not dropping, you're not dragging. But gosh, we've had some where we lost every third word,
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure how Scoop handles that. He somehow fixes it in the studio. I think he just records a bunch of extra words that he can drop in.
I drink heavily before I go into editing.
And you instruct your listeners to drink heavily before they listen, and everybody's happy.
It does help, I think.
So you've done a lot of interviews. Are there particular interviews that really stand out for you that you were more excited about than any of the others you've done?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Isn't it funny? Her name just walked. This is the age thing. Her name just walked out of my head. She wrote the Guild of the Lesbian Vampire, and her name will come to me in a moment. I interviewed her for the 25th anniversary release of Guild of the Vampire Stories. And it was one of the first lesbian characters in the sci-fi fiction worlds that people really glommed onto. And it's brilliantly written. And there are so many layers you can relate to it on because it is good fantasy writing. It's also obviously wonderful to have a lesbian introduced into that genre. And she's an activist. She ran a WGBH as one of their first African-American TV shows. And she had so many stories to tell from that time. And that was one of the interviews. We were doing it in a live venue. We were at a bookstore, and it wasn't one of the cases where you have an audience sitting in front of you. It's people are kind of back in the stacks. They're reading and they're listening while you record the show. And it was just one of those moments where like this dome of intimacy kind of drops down on you. And we talked about, she was one of the plaintiffs for marriage equality in San Francisco. We talked about trying to bring a Black American perspective into TV broadcast, which was innovative at the time. We talked about her writing. Wow, that was to this day, and I think that was like 2013, 2014. I will still rerun that show to this day because oh man, it was great. It was just so great.
Was it Jewel Gomez?
Yes.
Okay.
And I've interviewed those that are like really high profile. It's like, wow, isn't it cool that I interviewed Al Gore? Isn't it cool that I interviewed Barney Frank? And I enjoy those, but it's the more unexpected ones.
I bet Salman Rushdie was fun.
Salman Rushdie. Okay, I'm gonna brag. I was a baby interviewer. I got him on a fluke. I was at KQED. I hadn't read his work. I boned up as fast as I could on it, but I felt very awkward going into it. And I probably because I didn't know his work as well, I decided more to focus on him as a person. So instead of using the usual intro music to the show, I arranged for the theme from Wizard of Oz to be played because it turned out he really liked Wizard of Oz. So you're coming into this interview with it about Salman Rushdie, and all of a sudden you hear, the Wizard of Oz theme coming in and the Munchkins singing, and he just started to laugh. And it put the interview on a very different footing than I think he normally dealt with. And it actually won the biggest public radio award that year. That was the Public Radio News Director number one best interview award that year. And I just, wow.
Yeah, sometimes it pays not to over research an interview because you may start just assuming things and driving it kind of in lockstep with their biography. Whereas it's good to go off the beaten path, find out what they are really up to, what really motivates them.
Yeah, and I think it was. I'm projecting, but I believe it was nice for him not to be treated primarily as a very studious, very intellectual writer who had a fatwa on his head, which is the first things anybody ever thought about with him. And probably less so to this day, gratefully. That's faded into the background for him. But I think at the time it was a bit of a novelty and he felt warm and welcome.
Well, he's got a great sense of humor,
He
does. And I think people, at least at one time, were kind of surprised at that because he's literary, and literary people are supposed to be really serious, but they're usually not.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he showed up in Bridget Jones' Diary. You have to have a sense of humor to do that. Yeah. He was a lovely, lovely, lovely man. He really was. Those are two of my favorites. I think those.
I guess I should ask if you've had any really horrible interviews that you'd want to talk about. Sometimes you don't want to disclose those things, but.
I don't have to mention the name. I will not mention the name. She was a lovely, lovely young woman. I emphasize young. She was a first-time writer. In fact, if I were charged with mentioning her name, I probably couldn't come up with it. I don't think she stayed in the business, but she had written a book. We were on KQED. We were just about to go into the intro. And right before they cracked open the mic, she looked at me. She said, "Are we live?" I thought, oh my God, nobody told her this is a live interview. How did she miss this? So open the mics, we go into the interview. She is visibly shaking. I was I think I was about 30 at the time, and I felt infinitely older than her because she seemed like such a babe in the woods. And the book was good. The book was, I can't remember what it was, but I do recall the book was good. And I was looking forward to interviewing her. It was nonfiction. I think it had to do with gardening or nature, the environment, something along that line. And couldn't get her to settle into her skin. I couldn't get her to really just start breathing and talking about what I knew she knew. And I thought, okay, if I ask her to read something, she'll get into the vibe of her own words. So I selected something and said, why don't you, I did an intro for it. And I said, well, why don't you read a bit of that for us? She said, okay. She takes the book, opens to the page, and she starts to read. And then she stops. And she picks up her glass of water. And she starts taking this long drink of water. And we're on live radio. And I had this vision of doing like this golf announcer voice just to cover that. And now she's drinking her water. And now she's putting her water glass down on the counter. What do you do with that that silence.
You should have put something in the water.
So yeah,
that might have made a difference.
So yeah, she eventually put down the water and finished reading. And and again, my heart has gone out to her over the years, because we finished that show off the air at 10:59, and by 10:59:05, she was down the hallway and almost the door. And she probably counts that as one of the most humiliating. I mean, good Lord, she's on San Francisco's #1 station. And I just, oh my God. But as an interviewer, as an interviewer, and a relatively young interviewer at that, I had no idea what the hell to do with that. That was it. The only other one, and this is one that sticks in my craw. Again, I will not, I'm tempted to name the organization, but I will not. We're having again, this was on KQED. We're having a discussion about a political issue that was of great local import. And we had brought in 3 representatives from 3 different activist groups that had very different opinions about how this issue ought to have been handled. And once we got on the air, they denied any dissent whatsoever. And it became very clear, very fast, that they had decided that a united front was better for them politically. So I would bring up specific things. Well, here in this interview, you had said, and ma'am, you had a problem with this because you felt that he didn't cover blah, blah, blah. And well, no, we've worked that out. I actually think he was true at the heart of it. And we had an hour of radio with 3 inherently dishonest people. What do you do with that? And at least one of these was an organization that up to that point I had because I'm an activist myself, and I kept that, you keep that quiet on KQED, but I was an activist myself, and this is an organization I had a huge amount of respect for. And ever since then, when I've seen their name affiliated with anything progressive, I cannot separate that from what they did to me, sandbagging me as an interviewer and being dishonest. An hour of dishonesty on the air.
Oh, that's terrible.
Never forgot it.
This actually is a pretty good segue into a question I really wanted to ask about your, you like started doing more or less mainstream media, and then you left for Mother Jones, which what was that? Was that on Radio America or?
That was on Air America.
Air America, yeah.
And I grew up reading Mother Jones in the heart of god-awful Indiana. I grew up.
Me too. I was a charter subscriber, in fact.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. I had to stop reading it at one point because it was making me so paranoid, but I was a charter subscriber. It actually had a different name, which I can't remember anymore, but they changed the name of the magazine before they published the first issue.
I didn't know that.
Between getting people to come on as subscribers and publishing the first issue. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. There was some good reason for them to do that, but that was one weird thing about it. But they've been very consistent since then, and of course, rabble rousers.
Yes, God bless them. Yeah. And
so why did you make that change?
Well, and there were a number of reasons. Over the course of what had happened since 9/11 and what was happening with climate change and what was happening with some of the very key issues that went to who we are as a nation and how we respond to things, I was getting up to here with the both sidism of NPR. The fact that they would not use the word torture with what was happening in Guantanamo and happening to people in our charge appalled me. And with the climate change issue, they would bring climate deniers on the air who had a vested interest in making sure no one believed in climate change and making sure that they could disembowel the science behind climate change, and treated them as though they had equal validity without disclosing where their money was made, without disclosing who was funding their organization? And I was getting more and more fed up with that. There were some personal things going on at KQED, but I think that goes with, just your growth as a person. You kind of want to move on to other things. But mostly it was just that both sidism that was really getting to me. And there was a great leeriness, both locally and nationally, on taking a side on things that increasingly to me seemed urgent to our survival as a democracy. And I was really getting tired of pretending that everything could be treated intellectually, dispassionately, with equal respect for all, with an assumption of goodwill in all. And Mother Jones was as far away from that as you could get. It's interesting because I was called into audition for Mother Jones Radio, which was a weekly show on Air America, a weekend show. And as every new issue came out, we would bring in the authors and talk to them in more depth about their articles and about things that were related to but not in their articles. And the very first issue that I worked on with Mother Jones Radio was all about the money that started with Exxon and was laundered into various quote unquote grassroots organizations that were designed to cheapen the science, that were designed to cultivate doubt where there shouldn't have been any. And I remember that there was a graphic of this octopus-like beast. Here's Exxon, and here's the money going here, and here's this radio host who gets all of his money from this group, and here's this network that gets all their money from that group. And I went from a situation where that sort of thing would eventually, I don't think it would get poo-pooed out of resistance, but I think a level of fear would have crept in about covering that. And they were just laying it out. They just laid it out there. This is why there are so many questions about climate change, because the denial and the lies and the disinformation are being funded. Here are the lines. Here are the receipts. Here's the evidence. Damn, what a difference. What a difference. It was awesome.
Money has always been a big problem in journalism because it depends on who's giving the money to whom. I had a friend, Larry Lee, who worked at KQED before he went over and did investigative reporting at Channel 4. And he would constantly just go to a boiling point when he tried to investigate something that related in some way to a big donor of funding by. And if you stepped on the toes of somebody whose name was on the funding by announcement, then you didn't get that done. And did you encounter that at any point where they're like, well, that's a great story, but...
I was not close enough to the news production to know that. It may have happened while I was there. It may not have. I do recall, and I think this was after I left, but I can't be sure. They were going to do, on the TV side, they were going to do a history of the wine industry or the wine culture, and it was being funded by a big wine company. And they didn't seem to see the conflict there, that this was essentially going to be a documentary funded by the very industry that it was documenting. And it went public and they had to backtrack. And to me, I thought, really? You had to be schooled on that? You didn't see the inherent problem here? But I also remember when, was it Talk of the Nation? No, it was This American Life. Did an expose on a corporation that was a big funder of public radio. And of course I can't think, man, I haven't had enough coffee. I know it's a cliche, but I literally haven't had enough coffee today, which is why I couldn't come up with Jewel Gomez's name. And now I can't think of this industry monster that, anyway, at any rate, yeah, they went ahead and did their investigative expose and said, by the way, this is a funder of National Public Radio. Just said it. That's the reality. We're investigating them. Here's what we found. By the way, they give public radio money. I think that was groundbreaking. Really admire them for that.
Disclosure is great. By the way, if
Just-
this was a live interview, we would give you lots of coffee.
Oh God.
We'll have to do that
Yes.
next time.
This is my coffee bucket, and it's only been filled once today. So, wow.
So just, there's been a lot of discussion of mainstream media, especially over the last, since 2016, since the very strange, like Trumpist cult started, and all those people started leaping in and talking about how you can't believe anything that the mainstream media says. And of course, we know there are some iffy things about mainstream media, but I don't know where else you go to find like good professional journalists who have learned standards of journalism and ethics and so forth, and have really studied that stuff. So it seems like kind of a quandary to me. On the one hand, you know that money and political leanings and so forth influence the mainstream media news organizations to some extent, and sometimes in a big way. But on the other hand, you're not going to go to the, are you going to go to the Drudge Report to get truth, or to Breitbart or someplace like that? It's a quandary. I think that we have a kind of crisis here where we have to question reality.
Yeah. And, we were talking about funding of disinformation. There's been a long pull to get people to distrust mainstream media, and mainstream media aided that quite a bit here and there. We talk about the entry into the Iraq War and what was going on at the New York Times. But to me, it's just so easy. It's so easy to say, well, you can't trust the New York Times now. Can't trust them. John, you and I know people who work their butt off to do good journalism there. You don't throw out a friend because occasionally they show up without announcing themselves, or because, they leave their shoes on where you don't want them to. To me, you accept these news organs as they are. It's your job to vet them. It's your job to be aware they're not flawless. It's your job to be aware, just as a news consumer, insofar as we all have time for this, which most of us don't, but trust but verify. But don't throw them out.
This actually gets to one of the great things about doing interviews. When you interview somebody, you're just asking them the questions and they're answering. And unless you doctor that in some way, which of course is possible now, especially with deep fakes and that sort of thing. But otherwise, the interview is its own truth. And, the concern is not whether you're getting accurate information. It's just it's more like how personally believable the person is, and to some extent, how well they respond to harder questions that you might ask. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think interviews are sort of a pure form of journalism and news. And I would sort of prefer reading interviews and conducting interviews to the more traditional form of putting stories together. And an interesting thing about that, for years I would do interviews with people, and I would sit down and I would transcribe those interviews word for word, and I would edit those words as little as possible. And the people that I interviewed always said, "Oh, that's great. Nobody's ever represented me as well as you have here." And I was aware that other journalists were, they would conduct an interview and they would just take notes. Right. And then they would take their notes and they would write a piece based on those notes. And apparently they would sort of lose something in the translation, So as pure an interview as you can present, I think you're as close to the truth as you can get.
Yeah. I want to make sure to and I'm sure that this is what I'm putting words in your mouth. I think this is what you mean too. And what I would say to that is, of course, interviewing has its place alongside investigative journalism and, spending your days going through files and FOIAs and all that. I mean, they're two different animals. But yeah, one of the things I like most about live interviewing, you don't have the choice of editing somebody else's words. You don't. What gets out there gets out there. And it also, as an interviewer, if you're doing a live interview and there's an audience listening, it keeps you on your toes to be as honest as you can in terms of calling people on their stuff, in terms of asking a little further when maybe they're not quite eager to go there. There's such a marvelous give and take. And the more you can be authentic to your subject and your guest, and I think the guest picks up on that and is more authentic as you go along. There's stuff that you hear in an unedited interview that can't be reproduced anywhere else. And that's warts and all. That's warts and all.
Yeah,
So,
live interviewing is preferable as far as getting the unedited version of whatever their story is. But my early days in radio, I encountered people in news who were very skillful editors to the point of making a story that didn't really exist. They just took quotes that they had recorded from some interview, rearranged it, cut it to where it had a total different meaning of what the person was trying to get across. And I've seen that happen. I still see it happen, or what appears to be that way, because now it's so easy to be media. It used to be expensive. When I got started in radio, most people couldn't afford to have their own radio station or their own news operation. Now anyone can do it if you have a laptop and a few people who will listen to you. You're media.
Which we've proved.
And is that a bad thing or a good thing? That the bar for entry has been pretty much removed.
God, that's such a hard question. I think it's a net gain with a big fat asterisk. I think the industry is expanding. I think I wonder if the word industry is even appropriate anymore in that case. But what I'm afraid is that the number of voices that are accessible now and are being magnified, that's not being paralleled with an education in critical listening and critical thinking. If we had as many people being educated in how to take in information and think it through and vet it, if that were growing at the same pace as the sheer number of voices and sources we have out there, that would be ideal. That would just be ideal. But we have nothing near that. That has long been, that's my lottery dream. I've been saying this for decades. If I had access to just a ton of money, I would create age-appropriate critical thinking courses from kindergarten on, maybe even preschool on. And if a school wouldn't carry it, you could do private lessons that parents could maybe sign their kids up for, or teach it in summer camps, or do whatever you can to let people access that from day one. I think if you look at QAnon, if you look at a third of people who identify as Republican think that Trump is going to retake the office this year. My God. And I think that is a reflection of the fact that we don't prioritize from the very beginnings of education, teaching people how to think, not what to think, how to think. How do you take information? How do you find the coloring in that information? How do you check out the source of that information? And here's my okay, now we're getting into utopia on Plutopia. But my utopian vision of that is that if we all learn how to do that, or as many people as possible learn how to do that, the voices that will survive and thrive in this changing industry will be the most credible ones. And I think the situation we're in now is that the ones that are surviving and thriving are doing so to an extent because of that, but also because they know how to run a Twitter account. They know how to pull, a soundbite. They know how to, drum up interest. They know how to do clickbait, the verbal equivalents of clickbait. If we could change the world to where the most informed and intelligent and aware voices are the ones that would rise to the top, I'd love to see as many voices out there as possible.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been thinking about just in my own work and the stuff that I'm doing, that it's really important for me to be skeptical.
Yes.
I mean, you kind of find yourself wanting to be clever or entertaining or something like that. And sometimes that means that you're going along with something that you really probably shouldn't be. And now I'm realizing that, I mean, if you take responsibility for critical thinking yourself and manifest it in what you write or what you ask or what you tweet or whatever, then that has an influence and it helps other people to see critical thinking in action, and maybe they're going to do critical thinking too.
Yep.
So skepticism is starting to be, it's starting to be sort of my new religion.
Yeah. And you mentioned what you tweet in there. I love Twitter. Twitter's like the well is my first online home. Twitter is my second online. I love Twitter. I have so much fun on Twitter, and I've met people and I've been able to interview people I otherwise would not have, because instead of going around their publicist or their book agent or wherever, I tweet them and say, hey, can I interview you? I mean, it's fabulous. However, it's verbal clickbait. You have 240 characters or 280, whatever it is, where and it lights up those little sections in your brain when you get retweeted. Oh, look, this got retweeted 240 times. How, that's cool. That's acceptance. That's affirmation. But it's also, as you were just saying, it's also a way to perpetuate information out there that doesn't have critical thinking or awareness or skepticism behind it. And I did that the other day, and I kicked myself for doing it. And I constantly have to monitor myself. The New Yorker put out a tweet that said there is a new conflict in the world of teaching law because of this idea that they should excise the teaching of Dred Scott, because it's too traumatizing. The language of the ruling, the phrasing, the assumptions behind it can be very triggering for minority people. And I thought to myself, what the hell? And so I took that and I retweeted it and I put up top, what the hell? It was a deliberately misinformed, inaccurate tweet that they had put out. Because if you clicked that New Yorker link and you went to the story, first of all, it was a guy who had a thought. That it was not a controversy in the industry. It's a guy who put out a thought. Gee, maybe we ought to look at how we're teaching Dred Scott. And even he and the others who subsequently discussed it were talking about compressing how Dred Scott was taught, about maybe removing some of the language that would be traumatic for people that were reflective of a different time when we were indifferent to people's humanity. They were by no means talking about excising Dred Scott from what is taught in law. That was a completely disingenuous, dishonest tweet by the New Yorker that was contradicted by the content of its own article. And I busted myself retweeting that without reading the article because it was inherently infuriating. And because unfortunately today it was also completely believable. So I retweeted the what the hell. I caught myself and said, you didn't even look at that article. And I deleted the tweet right away. And then I went and looked at the article and said, thank God I deleted that. because they pulled clickbait and I fell for it. And to me, the New Yorker should be, to say the least, should be above that kind of crap.
Did you get the little alert from Twitter that says, "Did you read the article?"
Oh, I hate that. Yeah, I got that. And you know what bothers me? I'll tell you why I hate that. I start the day by looking at a ton of newspapers and news sites, and I've just recently retired my show, and I'm still devouring news in the morning as if I still have a radio show to do, and I need to stop that, but I'm still doing it now. I wake up and I read all these news stories, and I go to the well and I see what they're talking about, and by the time I go to Twitter, I've read most of the big news out there. And so when I get those little pushes from Twitter, do you want to read the article first? And I want to say, do you think I haven't? Well, in that case, I hadn't. But generally, I just it's just that assumption that Twitter is the only place I would have clicked on that. Nope. I go other places and click on things too. I see why they do it. I see why they do it. It just bothers me.
You mentioned the way that history is taught. In Texas, there's a whole movement. In fact, they just passed laws that will prohibit teaching things that involve race that might be disturbing to all those little white kids out there in the suburbs. And that's going to be put into law essentially. I mean, it's not quite as cut and dried as that, but that is the way I see what they did in that law of saying you can't do this special education classes, special Black history or Latin American history or whatever. It has to be something that builds up the confidence of whoever these kids are, and doesn't disturb them with all these nasty things that we've done in the past. Yeah, and I see these things going on, and it's just frightening that these are people in power that are making these decisions on education.
I'll tell you what, you take 200 chimpanzees and give them computers, and you put them in a room, and you just let them type at random. And they will come up with an accurate definition of critical race theory faster than any of the people who are legislating against it. I mean, if you took these people who are so alarmed, and critical race theory has become, the banner that we're all fighting against. It's kind of like listening to people decry communism. And you ask them calmly and sanely, what is communism? What does that mean? What is that government structure? And I have had that conversation with people. I've had that conversation with people about socialism. And what they're using it as a shorthand for bad people. They couldn't define it or define the difference between the two on a bet. And now critical race theory, CRT, has been created as a banner for a bad thing.
It's like what they've done with wokeism. This idea of wokeism or woke.
Oh my God.
It means you're racially sensitive. And they're saying that's really bad. Really bad to be racially sensitive. But what they're really talking about is they're saying it's bad to be racially sensitive and act on it.
Yes.
To
be aware of other people's humanity and sensitive to it.
Yeah.
Is absolutely appalling now. And the whole concept of, I know we're going to get into this, but cancel culture. The guy whose horse was found, he wins a race. His horse is found to have drugs in its system, and he says he's being canceled. This whole cancel culture cry is just, it's laugh or cry. It's laugh or cry. It's just gotten so ridiculous, but it has an impact. It does have an impact.
They canceled Al Capone too.
Yeah, they did cancel Al Capone.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole cancel culture thing is it's bizarre, partly because they're not just saying that there's a cancel culture, but they're saying that there's a cancel culture and it's owned by a particular ideology or a political group, when, people have been canceled forever, and they're not just canceled by this guy or that guy. It just happens all the time, and it's always happened. It's not new. It's not a culture. It's just that people decide that they don't want to hear something or don't want to see something, and they act accordingly, you know?
And it cheapens the concept too. I mean, there have been cases of people who have come up against current standards and they get death threats and their kids get death threats and they're scared on the street. These cases are being thrown into the same basket as a guy whose horse got caught with drugs in its system. It's all cancel culture. So you can't deal with social media shaming, which is a real thing, becoming a social pariah because of something you tweeted 3 years ago. It's a real thing. And I don't think we can deal with it sanely because it's all being called cancel culture. Even Barry Weiss, who left the New York Times because they were too woke, she did, and I need to be honest, I did not listen to her podcast. I read about the podcast. And as I understand it, in her podcast, she said she doesn't want to use the word cancel culture because of what happened to her guest, which was a matter of social shaming and death threats and, you know, their whole life being thrown into an uproar. She doesn't want to call that cancel culture because she feels the term is overused and abused and takes attention from what she's talking about happened in this case with these people. I don't read a lot of Barry Weiss and say, yay, you. We're much too different for that. But I kind of said, yay, you. Don't use the banner. Don't use the sting word. Talk about the facts. Here's the story. Here's what happened. You know, it doesn't help to categorize it because then you argue about the category. Talk about what happened.
There's actually a lot of that going on. And we saw that on The Well, you know, where there was a discussion of cancel culture and people almost got canceled in that discussion. I should mention that Angie and I are both members of The Well, which is an online community that's been around for like 35 years. And we both just recently became hosts of a conference called Media. And that has been quite a ride.
Imagine a hall full of people who've had their coffee and or cocktails, and they start talking about things within the media that the media is covering, how the media is covering it, what's going on in society around the media, and they all want to be heard at once, and some of them differ with how the others are discussing it, and wow.
And sometimes people get emotional. Yeah. But I wanted to take that opportunity to plug The Well because people will say, is that place still around? Oh, yes, it's still around.
Yes, it's still around. You know, I've noticed a number of people, my email address is coiro@well.com. And when I first joined The Well, which was, late 90s, I think, late 90s. And it used to be people would see your email address and say, oh, The Well, huh? It still had a little, you know, cachet. And then it became, oh, is The Well still around? And now it's become no reaction at all. It's like, okay, how do you spell that? W-E-L-L? Okay. And that's it.
What's The Well?
What's The Well? You know, they even ask that. Yeah, they probably think I work for a health company or something.
Yeah, it's a place we go. It's very deep.
Yes, I love The Well. The Well has, you know, it's interesting to watch other social media become so prominent in people's lives. I don't go near Facebook. There is an account for my radio show on Facebook. Never go there. All it says is, hey, we don't hang out here. Go over there. I do hang out on Twitter. I have an Instagram account. I don't go there. And I don't want to say that real relationships aren't formed there and maintained there. I have made friends on Twitter who've been to my house, who I care about, who I've cried on, who I've held when they've cried, you know, who we've celebrated things together. Those are very real. I still contend that a conferencing group where you get together every day under your own name, where you're expected to post full thoughts and listen to other people and respond honestly, that to me nurtures the deepest possible the deepest possible relationships. And I think that's the big difference between the well and just about everything that succeeded it. The well got me through my divorce. I dated people on the well, you know. I do this a lot. Very upfront on my show, when I'm interviewed, on the well, on Twitter, I'm very upfront that I have mental health issues. I just think it's really important to put that out there because a lot of very successful, fun, fabulous people like me have to deal with mental health challenges.
You're in the right place.
You know, yes. And I have had so much help from the well with that too. That's one of the most intimate things you can deal with. And infinite help from the well in my worst times of depression. Infinite help. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
We're getting close to the end of our hour, and I was looking on your pre-interview, what you wrote back to John as a pre-interview questionnaire, and the last line is, the biggest political question: what will become of the Republican Party? What will become? Where are they headed? I
wish I knew. Some of I refer to some people that I've become close to on Twitter. One of them is, times are strange. Times are making some really odd bedfellows. There's a writer, intellectual, and teacher by the name of Tom Nichols, who was very big in the Republican Party his whole life, and big on, he was personally invested in it. He since then had become an advisor to the Lincoln Project. And he and I have had a number of discussions, and I think that a avowed Republican is somebody I probably wouldn't have had a lot of empathy with and discussion with. And he is immensely critical of what's happened to the Republican Party. He has declared himself no longer a Republican. There are many people like him, very prominently. And I would look to them to say, what the hell is going to happen to your former party? No idea.
Their party was hijacked.
Yeah. It's hijacked. Can they get it back? Should they bother to get it back? Is there any idea whether a third party could possibly, it's never made it in this country in modern times? These are people without a country right now. They really, here I am feeling sorry for a passel of conservative people who disagree with so much that I disagree with, but they're honest and good Americans who have no party anymore. And I don't know what's going to happen to them. And I don't know consequently what's going to happen to us as a democracy. I have no idea. I know it's absolutely terrifying.
Well, they may be part of the solution for sure. You know, the people who have become disaffected and who have left that party. I found a good quote from Marx today that's pretty relevant. Groucho, not Carl. Says, politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies.
I think you just described social media too.
I know. I love that quote. Well, are we out of time, Scoop?
To be honest, I was paying such close attention to the interview that I have no idea. Well, we're almost out of time. So
well, I know you'll edit it honestly anyway. So even if we run over,
I try to edit as little as possible. I'll cut out a dog barking or something like that, but I like to just let it all come out and take it as you like it. Yeah. But we'd love to have you on one of our real live interview show. We do a live
stream, yeah.
That'd be so much fun. I love this. This has been a hoot.
Oh yeah, we'll do that for sure. We do our live stream every Thursday night.
Cool.
What were you saying, Scoop? I interrupted you there.
No, I was just saying, we don't have any real ground rules for the live show. It's like whatever you want to say. It's out there. It's live, and you have to live with it.
I would tell you guys can tell that I'm completely at ease because all the events that I do now, because of the era we're in, everything I do is online. And my hair is always pretty perfect. And I always have my trademark dark lipstick on. And you guys know I'm so comfortable with you because I'm wearing a sweatshirt and no lipstick. And I think that says I probably qualify for Thursday nights.
You know, I have a question that's been on my mind since we started this interview. Yeah. I see a couple of action figures behind you on that shelf, and I'm wondering who they are. Is
Yeah,
it
okay,
Fauci
well,
and Kamala Harris?
That's AOC.
Oh, AOC.
Kamala Harris is
Okay.
on her way. I don't have Kamala yet, but I've got her on her way. This is my beloved RBG, of course. I don't know why Nancy Pelosi's not here. She's still in her package, I think. She has a removable blue mask. And this is Fauci with his mask.
Thought so, yeah.
They are from a company. I'll go ahead and pitch them because they raise money for these on Kickstarter, and it's called Factory, but there's no owner. I think it's FACTRY, and they do all these marvelous figures. I love them.
I have my action figures. I've got Mickey and I've got Gumby.
Gumby!
My spirit animal.
Love Gumby.
I have a few. I mean, I have actually minus. Now this one's dated.
What's that?
This is Porcupine from Pogo. Remember Pogo?
Oh my God, yeah. When I was reading Pogo, I was way too young to get it. I missed so much of Pogo, and in retrospect, having heard so much about it, I wish I'd gotten it. Oop, let's see.
I like
There you
this.
go.
Can you see the thing that says
FCTRY.
join our liberal bubble and take 10% off?
Yes, FCTRY.com. I love these
They
guys.
got them all. Yeah, there's Pelosi and Obama and Biden together.
Elizabeth, I don't have Elizabeth yet.
Yeah, you got to get Warren. There's Hillary Clinton.
Well, John, we need to get some Scoop and John bobblehead dolls for our merchandise. We've got coffee cups.
I think you guys need to do bobblehead.
I'm sure we can do that.
Yeah. I have a natural bobblehead. I'm always doing this anyway.
Well, thanks for joining us, Angie. This has been great fun, and I'll get back to you about doing one of the live streams soon, too.
I love that. I would totally love that. Cool.
Okay, great.
All right, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, off we go.
All right. See you later,
Thanks
guys.
so much.
Bye.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.